The way I understand astrology is on this basis, that every individual, insofar that he is an individual, insofar that he is part of the world idea, there's a meaning in his life, a pattern of events, situations, circumstances. There's a growth of understanding that's taken place because of the interaction of this person with the world. And that if he really penetrates into the meaning of the events and circumstances that are going on in his life, he is getting at the quintessence of the meaning of his life to him. Right? And that I thought that this was really the fundamental purpose of astrology, that this is what astrology should help a person to understand. But in this way, astrology can be a really spiritually potent tool, so that the person could try to be aware of what significances are blossoming as his life. He's living these ideas. He is these ideas. Why not try to consciously understand what's going on?
It sounds so exciting the way you weave together all the different opinions and organize and cover a pattern. It sounds very, very tempting.
Well, yeah, that was one of the things that I was so hopeful of doing, you know, because when I devised that scheme, that in other words, when I started working with the astrological symbolism, and I began to recognize that what these people are talking about, and by these people I mean almost any philosophic school, that I could illustrate in terms of the astrological symbolism the point of view that they were expounding. And I could use the entirety of the symbolism to show, for instance, where a Buddhist might be coming from, or where a Vedantist or a Neo-logician might be coming from. Let me put it this way. Let me start differently. When I started studying philosophy, I was a young man, you know, got very interested in it. And I started studying all the various schools of philosophy, whether East or West, because at an early age I started reading Eastern literature. I mean, I was just as comfortable there as in Western literature. And I felt that it's not conceivable that a sage like Shankara and another one like Buddha, all right, could possibly disagree. It wasn't conceivable to me. Right? And yet the fact remains that on the one hand you have the great Buddhist tradition, and on the other hand you got the Vedic tradition, and that for a couple of 100 years or 1,000 years they've been quarreling with each other. Right? And so I found that very difficult to accept and understand. And that would be true, like for instance, like within the Hindu tradition, the Neo-logicians are arguing against the Vedantists, or within the Buddhist tradition, the Yogacara school is arguing with the, let's say, the Madhyamikas, all right? Or in the Western schools, all right, you have the rationalists against the empiricists, and the empiricists against the idealists against the rationalists, and on it goes. And I couldn't accept it, and there was something in me saying there is somewhere a totally comprehensive symbol that will include the divergences, all right, and everything that is fundamentally true in any one of these schools can be shown and symbolized. And so when I got the idea that I might find this in the astrological symbolism, because it is, in my opinion, the only schemata that has the initial premises that are comprehensive enough to include the variety of philosophical traditions. So I went to work on that. And over the period of years, I began to realize that I could show, in terms of the astrological symbolism, the validity of the Buddhist position, would show the validity of the Vedantic position. And as we started doing that, it became really exciting. Because there, within that I was able to do it. You know? So if I took the Platonic tradition, I could lay out that whole scheme in terms of the symbolism. I took the Vedantic tradition, I could do the same thing. And in the case of, let's say, a school like the Naya school, Naya logicians in India, or let's take a representative philosophy of 20th century, Santayana, I could show their premises, I could show what part of their premises are valid and why it would have a kind of eternal validity, but what parts of it had to be shedded and thrown out and disregarded. And then after a while, most of these schools do have certain presuppositions that are meaningful and valid. And so you began to get this totally comprehensive view of how they interface each other, how they interlock, how they interrelate. And that the notion that there is any one tradition that could do that, became unnecessary. That they're all different facets of this one incomprehensible truth. So that was a project I'd like to, see through, but I don't know that I would have the time now to do it.
He says it is necessary for people to protect their own beliefs and religions and to find the struggle for them and to believe that they are the only valid ones. Otherwise it wouldn't have been so much.
Well, a lot of that, but a lot of that comes from the fact that individuals are genetically and let's say ontogenetically and phylogenetically so constituted, all right, that it predetermines what kind of philosophy they're going to believe in. So that in astrology, where you can see the indefinite plurality of different views, you can see that they can all be subsumed under the astrological symbolism, where you're working with, let's say, 360 ideas, which can be combined in such a variety of ways that a certain personality is organized or constituted by these, and then these ideas are paramount for him, whereas another person is psychically organized and constituted in such a way that a different set of ideas are of paramount importance to him. And when you begin to see that, then you begin to see the validity in each person's view about reality as he understands it, but you also see the limitations. Because no one is comprehensive enough to, let's say, include this indefinite plurality of ideas which constitutes our mind's functioning. So once you begin to see that, there's a kind of feeling of joy and liberation from the fact that you don't have to believe that this is the only right idea or that's the only right idea, but that all of them in their totality constitutes different facets of the truth, and then that ultimate truth has to be realized for oneself personally. So I saw this as I saw it in terms of the article I just read, this one here, where he says that all the conflicting doctrines that have appeared in the past were not meaningless and not useless. They played their part most usefully, even where they seemed most contradictory. They were really in collaboration, not in opposition. We need not disdain to illustrate the highest abstract principles by the homeliest concrete anecdotes. And he goes on, he says, a full view of the universe now replaces all the partial views which were alone available before and which embody merely single phases of the discovery of truth. Thus the analytical movement which uncovered the various pieces of this world puzzle must now yield to a synthetic process of putting them together in a final, united pattern. And that's what I had in mind trying to do, to try to put all these pieces in a pattern, and show how, to a certain extent, they're all valid, and also at the same time how they're limited, in one way how they're complementary, in another way how they're in opposition. And the only thing that I felt was big enough to do that was the symbolism that we find in the astrological, mandala. So that was really the pet project I had in mind that I liked it. And the nice thing is it's got such a liberating effect, because when you see the value in the premises that the let's say the Vedantist has, and then you see the value in the premises that the Buddhist has, you're free from the conflict. So before, when we were talking, and I think Hawken was asking Paul about the conflict that was taking place between the Hindu and the Vedantist and the Buddhist. And like the Vedantist would speak about the self-identity, the identity of the knower, that the identity of the knower must be, otherwise we couldn't account for the continuity of knowledge and be able to validate it. And then the Buddhists said, no. They said, the world is changing instant by instant. There is no identity of an I. There could be continuity, but no identity. Now, if we understand, let's say, another perspective, we take a point of view from Plotinus, or better still, right from one of the discussions Ramana Maharishi gave. If we think of it this way, if we think of the movie projector, all right, and on the one hand we have the reel with the film in it, which is being projected on the screen, okay? And every instant there's a new still being projected. All right. Now, within each picture that's being projected, you can take that as a position of the Buddhist. The Buddhist is saying, look, here's one picture, then the next picture, then the next picture. Now, within those pictures, where are you going to find a self-identical I? Because still A is different from still B. Still B is different from still C. So, where's this I that you're talking about that's self-identical? Now, the Vedantists could come along and say, well, that picture there is being illuminated by the light which is in the projector. And it is this light which is always self-identical with itself, and which is the same light regardless of how often the picture is being, projected. So one film could follow after another, and there is constant change. The world idea is changing every moment in time, all right? But the light that illuminates that, all right, remains self-identical. Well, if that's true, then both points of view are true, all right? And you have to see that if you take the premises of the Buddhist, that the world idea is in a state of high vibratory oscillation, changing from instant to instant, all right, then from that point of view, there is no identity. If you take the point of view that you're the light in the projector, which is always shining, regardless of what film is being played out, then there is an I which is continuous with itself. Right? So then both points of view are true. You have a knower which is self-identical with itself, this light which is in the projector illuminating the film. But the other point of view is true too. If you think of the world idea, all right, as a film, the oscillation from instant to instant of the world image, then within that, all right, you can't speak about there being any self-identity, and the world is in a state of constant flux. Well then, why can't you hold on to the two of them? The two views perfectly explain everything. And the fact of the matter is that someone like P.B. and Plotinus explains it that way. On the one hand, there is the soul, or the mind, which is self-identical with itself, always remains what it is. On the other hand, there is the content, the world idea, which is flashing into it from instant to instant. Right? Now the soul tends to identify with the psychosomatic organism or a body which the world idea contains within itself. Right? And now, since that soul or mind is identified with that psychosomatic entity, it takes itself to be an I. But the Buddhists would say, how could you be an I? Because from instant to instant, you're not the same. So they would be right in pointing out that this has no I. Right? But on the other hand, right, the Buddhists would be wrong if they insist that there is change without a consciousness which doesn't change but is aware of change. So the 2 points of view are not in opposition, they're complementary.